Welcome back. This is the third in our series of better body use videos, and today we are going to be focusing on musicians. If you're not a musician, please don't switch off because there'll be lots of information that you will find useful as well in everyday life. I wanted to start by saying I've been working with musicians for over 15 years, and one of the main causes of injury that I see on a regular basis is over-practice and over-exercising. And over-practicing, I think it's this sort of scenario, you may recognize this, where let's say you're a guitar player, you sit in front of the TV and watch a movie while playing, and you think that somehow that's going to create more sort of flexibility or brain-body connection while you're doing that. But actually it's an inefficient way of improving your guitar playing because you're not really involving the brain. It's sort of a mindless activity. And when it comes to exercise, it's the same thing. If you just exercise and you're not really aware, let's say you're watching a video at the gym or you're just thinking about your dinner, that is also not the best way to exercise. And the good thing about muscles is they're kind of self-exercising. What do I mean by that? If you are playing an instrument and you're aware of your body and you're playing with fairly good body use, then you will be exercising the muscles that you need to play that instrument. It sounds crazy, but it's really true. So let's get started. I want to use examples right away from music. So we're going to just start by looking at standing. And for guitar players and bass players, I suggest that you stand just as often as you sit to practice. Because let's face it, if you're on a gig or you're playing in any situation really, other than in a theater, you will be standing to play. So it makes sense to have at least some of your practice routine involving standing with your instrument. Now, you may remember from the previous two videos that we talked about a home position. And in standing, all of the joints are naturally designed to align. My head joint, my shoulder, my hips, my knees, and my ankles all want to line up. That's just their natural inclination. So in order to have a good standing posture, all you have to do is let go of tension. But there are a couple of tips I can give you which will help you to make sure that you are doing all of the right things. The first one is to make sure that you are not locking your knees back. This is a really common one. So when I say locking your knees back, I mean where you're literally putting a lot of tension in the knees and it forces your knees backwards, which forces your pelvis to tilt as well. And we don't want that. That's not really very useful as a musician. So we're looking to keep the joints aligned. Now, I'm going to use a guitar as an example. So we'll take a few examples from guitar, and the same would apply to bass and also to electric instruments. When you take your guitar, the first thing to say in standing is let you be the first instrument and your guitar is the second instrument. So let it come to you. Now I'll explain that a little bit more by showing you when that doesn't happen. So quite often what I see with musicians is they wrap themselves around the instrument. And that's not really very useful because I've lost my home position. So you keep your integrity and let the instrument come to you. The second one for guitar players is to watch out for the left shoulder down. This is very common in bass and guitar players where the left shoulder goes down. This is probably because we think as guitar players that we have to get round to make those bar chords. And so we think that our arm has to go further and therefore we've got to put the left shoulder down. But that's just a fallacy. Your shoulder should remain the same and you can still reach everything on your guitar. If you can't reach everything, it may be that your strap is not at the right height. Now this is a whole area that you can look into separately, but basically if your guitar is too high or it's higher, then your right hand technique will suffer a little bit, but your left hand might be quite comfortable. If the guitar gets too low, then this arm has to work quite hard and bend at the wrist, and this hand is better. So there's a happy medium in there for every single guitar and bass player to find where that golden spot is for you. So play around with using the strap. Also, for seated practice, you must make sure that you're still using a strap. If you have the guitar lower and when you sit it puts the guitar in a different place, just have two straps so that the one that you use for sitting is shorter than the one you use for standing. Okay, so now we're on to sitting posture as a guitar or bass player. So the home position still applies. I still want my ear, shoulder and hip to be aligned, and I let the instrument come to me. Now, quite often what happens is we feel like we have to bring the guitar higher, so we sort of do something along those lines. Well, first of all, if you have a strap that's higher, that may not happen in the first place. But if you still feel that it's difficult for you to feel comfortable in this situation, buy yourself a cheap classical guitar stand. They're adjustable, and you can put your right foot on the stand, and it just makes life a lot easier. Now, I know you can't see my foot in this shot, but that's making my life a lot easier. Okay, so another top tip for guitar and bass. Always try to use a mirror when you're practicing. And if you don't have a mirror yet, then you could video yourself, or you could do both. Videoing yourself is a great way to see what your habits are. And when you know what your habits are, you can change them. So, some ideas now for keyboards. The first and most important one is still this idea of the home position. So lining up the ear, shoulder and hip. And it's possible to do that at all times at a keyboard, because as you move forwards, you can move from the hips. Now, I'm looking a little bit wooden, but I want to be sure you understand this idea that no matter where I am, I can keep lining up those three joints. In other words, it's the opposite of this, where I'm going forwards, but I'm misaligning my joints. The next one to mention for keyboard players is the joint between the ears, so the joint where the head meets the spine. Now, there's more detail about this in previous videos, but I will just say that it's possible, because of the swivel of this joint, to look down at the keyboard without taking your whole neck along with it. I'll show you what I mean. So we don't want to do this, because now the weight of my head has to be carried while I'm playing. So instead, I can keep the joints lined up, and I can look down with my face and send the back of my head up towards the ceiling while I play. And I can turn the head too. But all the while, you can notice that I'm keeping these two joints aligned. And the third point that I'd like to make is that the hips are free, and it's a ball and socket joint, so the hip moves in all directions. And this is really helpful for keyboard players because it allows the hips to follow the hands and arms as you play. What do I mean by that? As I'm moving down to the lower part of the keyboard, I can move using my hips, and it'll give you a bigger range and more of a flow when you play. So here are some more tips which will apply equally whether you're a drummer or a guitar player, bass player, keyboard, any instrument where you're sitting down. And that is, of course, sit bones. Be at the tops of those two sit bones. Make sure the weight is equally placed on both of the sit bones. If you don't remember much about sit bones, they're the two bony outcrops that are underneath you when you sit. Go back to the first two videos to see more detail on that. You too, drummers, can imagine a string coming from the top of your head. Also making better use of the hips, like we said just now to keyboard players, to get you round the kit, allow your hip sockets to be free. And an additional one I'll add for drummers is I often see drummers thinking that they're lifting their leg from right here somewhere around the hip, which wouldn't really work. It would be terribly inefficient to be lifting this great big leg from a tiny little lever. You're actually lifting your leg from a muscle called the psoas muscle. It's spelled P-S-O-A-S. So look it up on the internet and you'll see how extensive it is. It's right in the center of the body, and it goes close to the spine, it goes over the pelvis, and it attaches to the inside of the leg. And that is the main lifting muscle of the leg. So you will find it so much easier to lift your legs from that sort of thought pattern rather than from right here in the somewhere in the groin or in this area at the top of the hip. So for all musicians, taking a few moments before you practice just to think about where you are in space, some of the tips we've been talking about over the past 3 sessions, give yourself time. When you give yourself time, your body switches out of, oh my gosh, I'm about to play my instrument mode, and into, what's happening here? We seem to have paused. And when you pause, it gives you a chance to do different things, to allow your body to be slightly different. Otherwise, we just get tangled up in our habits, and it makes it really difficult to extract ourselves from the ones we don't want. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about singers. If you are a singer, some of the things we've already talked about are very relevant, such as keeping that home position. You will be mostly standing to sing, so allow your ear, shoulder, hip, knee, and ankle to align naturally by just staying free. A little tip for this is to think about the weight of the foot. Have you got some weight in the ball of the foot and some weight in the heel? You should have roughly 40% of your weight at the front in the ball of the foot and 40% of your weight back in the heels. And that will help you to create this home position more easily. Also, don't lock your knees back. Don't raise your ribs to sing. And one of my most common things I see with singers is when they go to sing, throwing the head back. Ah! That's actually not necessary because the jaw drops down and the skull should stay aligned. This is the skull, and the jaw is a separate piece of bone that goes up and down. So you could practice first without singing, and then bring the singing into it. Ah! That way your vocal equipment will be in the right place when you do go to sing. In other words, it is possible to keep the head balancing on the top of the spine while dropping the jaw to sing. Whether you are singing into a microphone or into a handheld mic, don't put your head towards the microphone like this to sing. Allow the microphone to come to you. So make sure the mic stand is high enough or that you're holding the mic close enough so that you don't have to disturb your head, neck, back balance in order to sing. I'm going to give you a top tip as vocalists, but this also applies to guitar and bass players. You can use a wall, or in this case a door if you don't have any wall space. Just make sure that the door is closed properly and that it can't open so that you fall. And what you're going to do is stand about 6 inches away from the wall and gently go back to that wall and then slide your knees so that you're kind of sitting on the wall almost. Wait for a moment, make sure that your back is making a nice contact you can feel. Because what quite often happens, if you're raising your chest, there'll be a big gap here. So you want there to be no big gap. And from here, you can practice singing and see what you can notice. And also guitar and bass players, you'll find this remarkable because bass players quite often have their right hand quite far back to pluck the strings. And the door or a wall won't allow that. So it's quite interesting to see what some of your habits are, whether you twist when you play or when you sing if you raise your ribs. So try that one at home. Well, we've come to the end of our series of 3 videos on improving body use. I hope you will try the main exercise that we gave you, which was to lie on the floor in the semi-supine position. If you haven't already watched video 2, there are details about semi-supine there. And at the end of this video, there will be a link to some guided audio sessions that you can try out. So thanks so much for watching, and I hope that you found these useful. Please leave your comments for us, and if you have any questions, we'd be very happy to answer those. Bye-bye.